Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret Sonics. This is episode 163 with Mikko Gordon. I had a great chat with Mikko. I'm so excited about this episode because Mikko has worked with some of my favorite artists, and this was such a great conversation. We talked about so much, including his journey in music, meeting Radiohead's producer Nigel Godrich, and lessons he's learned from working with him, how he's able to find artists he really wants to work with, establishing an aesthetic, philosophy on drum sounds. We talk about fast and fearless recording, reverbs, working with Tom York and Johnny Greenwood's new project, The Smile, his approach to mixing and compression, lessons from front of house, doubling down on your sound. We talk about staying healthy on tour, transitioning from a local scene into the global music scene, and everything in between. This is a great chat. I think you're going to love it too. So with all that to say, here's my conversation with Mikko Gordon coming up right here on Secret Sonics. Hey everyone. If you're anything like me, you often find yourself looking for business insight in podcasts. And I'm sure many of you are also into meditation and reflection to help better understand yourself. Former guest of the show, Carl Bonner, decided to launch a podcast that brings these two elements together. It's a series of guided self-reflection exercises, but specifically for freelance creatives like you and me, focusing on the struggles we face as we try to grow our businesses, while also finding more happiness in the work that we do. It's called Thanks for Thinking. It's definitely an unusual format, but if you want to grow your self-awareness, find deeper career satisfaction, and make more money, then I think this podcast might be for you. Experience it for yourself and click the link in the show notes below. You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I'm your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Mikko Gordon. Mikko is a mixing engineer and record producer based in London. Over the course of his career, Mikko has worked with many inspirational and talented bands and artists such as Tom York and Johnny Greenwood, The Arcade Fire, Idols, Gaz Coombs, Coloring, and Island. I came across a video of him working with Tom and Johnny on their new band, The Smile, and I'm a crazy Radiohead fan, so I immediately reached out and asked him to join me on the show, which he's graciously agreed to do. So with all that to say, welcome to Secret Sonics, Mikko.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a total pleasure. So tell me a bit about your journey, your story. I'd love to hear about how music started for you and how it. I know you off the air. You already told me how you grew up in Finland, but you're British, and I don't know. I'm just curious to hear the story. How did you end up doing what you're doing today?
Well, I've always been surrounded by music. My dad was a music journalist as a hobbyist, but a very serious hobby, and got to go to loads of concerts as a gig and meet lots of bands, which was really exciting. And I just always knew from a young age that I was going to be doing music in some way. So I grew up in Finland, as I mentioned, and just played in loads of bands there, and then came back to London to study, and very quickly realized I hated playing in bands. There's way too much democracy. You know, the guitarist is always arguing about the musical direction, and the bass player is always late for rehearsals, and the drummers keep quitting. But I'd always been kind of recording the demos and really fascinated about that part of the process. So that seemed kind of very natural area for me to move into. And once I graduated, I just set up a studio in London, started recording local bands, and also got into doing a lot of live sound. So did a lot of touring kind of early on, which I then stopped for a long time, but have been doing more recently again, a little bit of touring with Tom York on his various projects. Things kind of, developed from there, just working away, working with loads of different bands and artists. And then at some point I met Nigel Godrich, Radiohead's producer, who became a very kind of close friend and mentor to me. And we have worked on projects together over the years as well, which has been amazing.
Wow, that's crazy. How did you end up meeting him? I'm just curious.
I met him through my wife, who is an artist under the name of Laura Bettinson, and she was in a band with him called Ultra Easter. And so they released a couple of albums, and I was just obviously around and hanging out and helping out a bit, and kind of got to know Nigel through that.
Wow, that's amazing. Is there like one lesson maybe that, you learned from him over the course of working with him that you could maybe distill and share with the audience?
Something that's really stayed with me, he said to me once, stop worrying about making things sounding good and worry about making them sound interesting. And that really stuck with me. It's like, it's like you're looking to make sounds inspiring and interesting and creative rather than trying to get like some kind of perfect snare sound or something like that.
Yeah. It's I feel like that's something that, as we get started, we're just trying to find that perfect sound, and we're always trying to, like, I don't know, get to that Steely Dan kind of thing at the very beginning of your career, and then eventually you realize that kind of sounds boring. I mean, unless you're Steely Dan, obviously, but like when you make these recordings so sterile, it's actually makes for not so interesting and inspiring music. That's really interesting. So yeah, these days, how do I guess people just find you through word of mouth? How does stuff come through your door?
Yeah, word of mouth. I mean, I have a manager who's out there kind of talking with people, and I do also give him kind of lists of artists that I love when I hear new music or a new band I'm really excited about. I'll ask him to reach out to them and see if they're interested in working together. But mainly it is now people contacting me. I guess I'm fortunate enough to have been doing this for a long time and kind of managed to establish myself. And so, people are hearing the records I'm making and asking me to work with them too.
Yeah, the word of mouth thing is the strongest thing. So when you mentioned that you have the manager kind of reaching out to artists and seeing like if they're interested in working with you, what piques your curiosity? When you see an artist, what makes you say, "Hey, that's an artist I'd like to work with"?
That is a very good question. I mean, I'm always just interested in music that's trying to do something new or feels honest or kind of pushing boundaries in kind of some way. I think especially with bands, it's often tricky. We've had guitar music around for a very long time, and there's only so many ways you can play a certain number of chords in a row, and it's like, so what is some kind of spark or interest there that is going to feel exciting and new?
Can you give like an example of something that maybe recently piqued your curiosity?
I've just been working with a new Irish band called Somebody's Child. The album's not out yet, coming out I think early next year. And that was really interesting to me because they were kind of like, almost like harking back to early to mid 2000 kind of indie bands like Block Party or Arctic Monkeys. Mm-hmm. But then they also had this kind of like dreamy synth element that wasn't quite established. We kind of defined it in the end as the kind of Blade Runner sound. And so we were kind of mixing these kind of very dry, gritty indie guitars and drums with this kind of really dreamy Vangelis type of synths. And that was like a very interesting combination for me. Plus, the singer has an incredible voice and like really interesting lyrics. So I was like, yeah, I absolutely want to make this record.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like you have totally like niched into this kind of indie alternative British scene. How does one do that? Like, what was your journey like in terms of like specifically trying to get into that kind of music? Because I feel like so many people, like, we take on whatever comes through the door and just keep at it, and then eventually, it's an amalgamation or it leads you in some direction or another. I feel like this was an intentional kind of direction for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I never really wanted to work in mainstream pop music. There's some great pop out there. It just isn't the kind of thing that really excites me. And I went to Goldsmiths, University of London, did a music degree there, which was very kind of artsy atmosphere. So just a lot of like-minded, very interesting musicians around there. And I guess I always thought that the only thing I have going for me really is my aesthetic and my reputation. And every record I need to make, I need to feel proud about, or every song I work on. So I was just trying to consciously pick projects that I'm interested in, even if that sometimes meant saying no to work, which was, that's difficult especially when you're starting and you're broke and,
Yeah.
You need the work. But I guess for me, because I was doing some of the live sound stuff then as well, it meant, I didn't have to say yes to every single studio project that came along.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I didn't come through the kind of traditional start assisting someone and build your way like that. I just started producing tiny records with, other students or graduates or friends, and then expanding that into the kind of Southeast London scene. So I guess I kind of had, at least on that side of the coin, control of what I was working on, rather than just being thrown into a bunch of sessions where I'm the assistant in the back of the room.
That's really smart. I feel like so many people don't figure that out for like a decade or something, doing this. But you seem to have, like that thing you said, like all I have is my aesthetic and my reputation is like, that like says everything for, I guess, trying to like get into a specific thing or just to have, to do this for a long time, right? Like all you have is your taste. You can't try to beat Serban as a mixer. You just can only be the best mixer that you can be and give it your spin.
And I have a lot of young producers or mixers come to me and they ask, how can I do this? How can I kick things off in the next year or two? And it's just like, it's 5 years minimum. It's 10 years, I mean,
yes.
I was hustling for a long, long time before the phone started ringing. I was chasing the work. I was having to put myself out there. And, for a kind of shy Finnish boy, in London, that was definitely a challenge and something I had to work on a lot.
Yeah. Do you remember any like hurdles that you overcame that were like difficult, like maybe approaching a band at a show or something?
Yeah, nothing specific, but just, just having to put yourself out there and not being afraid of being turned down. I mean, there was a band called La Shark who were an amazing Southeast London cult band. They're kind of band now that you would have never heard of, but would have sold 500 or 800 cap venue out in London. And I did sound for them for a couple of gigs and then listened to some of their early recordings. And I just said to them and their manager, hey, you guys are amazing, but these recordings don't reflect in any way what you're doing live. And, I can help you with that. And that was the start of a great working relationship. And we worked on like a number of tracks over the next couple of years.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's the way to do it, I think. Let's jump into your process of actual production. When you're working with these bands, what's your is pre-production a big thing for you? How do you kind of get things started when you're working on a production?
Absolutely. I mean, it's all about the songs. So be listening to the songs together. I actually, going back one more step, one of the big parts of just even starting to work with a band or an artist is I always ask them, what are they looking for from a producer? Because sometimes some people are doing something and it's amazing and it's very fully formed. And I'm like, well, where are you hoping that I'm going to contribute? What are you expecting? And I feel like once we've had that conversation and our expectations are aligned, it's much easier to get started.
Yeah.
So sometimes it could be telling them, we need more songs, or this part's not strong enough, or let's just review some of the lyrics here and, see what we're actually talking about. What is our aesthetic? I'm really big on building a kind of sonic identity for a band or an artist or an album and discussing that a lot and what our approach is going to be. Sometimes it's shocking them as well, with this band Island, whose record I made, they very much came to me and said, we don't just want to be another indie band, we want to do something different. But despite them saying that, I could feel some resistance as well at the same time. And so I just got them into the studio and we made this ambient tape loop. We just had them making all kinds of noises and singing and playing bits in the studio, and I just put it all on tape and then made a loop and reversed it and slowed it down. And that became this sound bed for a song. And then the next thing I did is I had the drummer, I just gave him loads of bits of metal strapped to various parts of his kit and had him play this beat hitting these random bits of metal. So just kind of pushed them out of their comfort zone immediately, but then moved really quickly, and we just had some fun with it and just showed them some of the possibilities. And then that was like a way in then for the album together.
Once you kind of broke that, facade or whatever, break the ice, so to speak, and then you're in. I recently interviewed a guy named Tim O'Sullivan who used to work at Barefoot, and now he has his own recording space. And he told me he built all these crazy weird guitars because they had a ton of guitars at Barefoot, and you hand the guitarist some really bizarre guitar and they're totally like, oh, how am I going to play this? And then when you hand them back their actual guitar, they're like totally out of their head and they're able to kind of get a good take.
That sounds really great. Yeah, I'm really into that idea.
Yeah, that sounds like it sounds like you're already sort of in that zone.
Yeah, but I'm gonna have to check this guy out. What's this? Tim O'Sullivan.
Tim O'Sullivan. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he's very smart. Yeah, he's good. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So you talked about building like a sonic sound to the record. What like how do you kind of come up with that with the band? Is there like listening to other records? Is it like a concept? Like I know like Bjork has these like concepts and then all of a sudden they become records, you know?
I guess, I mean, all of those things. I think people think differently, people approach things differently, and I'm trying to look for the language that works best in terms of communicating with them. And so whether that sometimes that could be very conceptual, sometimes that could be a mood board in the studio with lots of like visual ideas like that. Those kind of visual themes can work really well for some people. For other people, it's just referencing and listening to music and hanging out together, and just, you know, playing tracks that you like to each other and taking it from there.
Nice. I noticed I was listening to a bunch of the music you sent me and that you've worked on, and I noticed something about the drums. They have like a very particular kind of sound, and I don't know what I would call it. Maybe earthy. You know, it doesn't sound like particularly punchy or boomy or anything, but they have this like, I don't know, richness or something. It's like an earthy quality. What do you think is that? And am I onto something?
Yeah, I mean, I'm into that kind of like dry, like 70s, like drum sound generally. And so that's the kind of thing I keep coming back to. And I've kind of developed some of my own drum miking techniques, which are maybe like slightly unusual. Some of them kind of inspired by kind of Nigel Godrich. I mean, I was always a big fan of the sounds of his records, and he and I share a similar aesthetic and taste, which I think is why we work so well together. I always find that it's like drums that date records. You know, you go back and you listen to something from, 10 or 20 years ago, and if it sounds very dated, often one of the key facts is that the drum sounds can really date things. And I kind of try, and in general, I want to make records that will still feel fresh in 30 years' time. And I feel like then if you have a kind of universal sound, it's kind of like a suit, like styles in suits, like change, sometimes 3 buttons or 5 buttons or like thick labels or thin labels. But you can buy like a really beautiful, elegant, kind of classic suit, and it will never go out of style. It's always going to be in style. So I think it's like the same thing applies in some ways to like sonics. There are like certain kind of classic things or sounds or which will always feel contemporary. And so I kind of have that in mind, especially with drums when I'm approaching things.
It's interesting you said that. I literally heard Nigel say the exact same thing on his interview with Hang Out with Audiophiles.
Did he really?
About drum setting. Yeah. Drums are the way that you know it's dated.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly how. Yeah. So I guess you guys hang out a bunch. But that's awesome. Yeah, and that does make a lot of sense. Like those 80s snare drums are the most unmistakable things that exist. Yeah, well, I'd love to hear a little bit more about some of those bizarre miking techniques or approaches to getting
I wouldn't
sounds.
even say bizarre. I guess I'm a big fan of like mono drums. So like a big part of the sound for me is a mono overhead. I probably go I know I go quite a bit closer with my like overhead mic than most people. And it's like kind of just like right over the snare drum, and is like a big part of that snare and kit sound, quite a lot of compression. And I kind of tend to have like overheads which are almost like a kind of like ride and hi-hat spot mic. They're kind of somewhere halfway in between. And so if I do want some stereo width, I can kind of use those, but a lot of the time as well I'm just using my mono overhead, and then kick and snare and some tom mics.
That's interesting that you said how close you put the overhead and its mono, because actually, now that I'm thinking about it, your snare drums do sound quite a bit like those kind of Wolfpack, or I don't know if you're into it.
Absolutely.
The Wolfpack or the Scary Pockets kind of like funky snares, which are often just recorded very low, right over the snare drum. It's like almost just like a drum mic, not like an overhead mic.
Yeah.
So that seems to be an interesting way to do it. Okay.
Yeah.
and then you compress it hard.
Compress it. Yeah. I mean, sometimes freaks drummers, like having that mic there, like right in your face. So, you know, you got to like,
Yeah.
you got to find a spot where they're comfortable with it too. And
Yeah.
sometimes what's weird, you know, is like the softer you play, the bigger it sounds. So
Yes.
it's like, even on like with like really aggressive stuff, if your drummer's open to those conversations and like pulling things back, and actually can end up sounding much bigger when the drum's not like completely choked out from just smashing the shit out of it.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. That must be a hard conversation though sometimes. It's probably hard for some drummers to kind of relearn how to play, right? Like,
I would always take a great performance over like the quality of sonics. So it's really just making sure that people are comfortable to play their best. And if they seem open to that, then it's a conversation that's interesting and fun to have. And if not, I wouldn't worry about it.
yeah, you just go with it.
You know, you just need good performances. You know, you can make anything sound good these days. But if it's not exciting or inspiring to listen to, it doesn't matter what's been done on the recording side. Still be a terrible song.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey everyone, if you're anything like me, then you're probably pretty tired of having your clients never pay you on time. Collecting payments is not what we signed up for when it came to doing audio for a living. It's time to make a decision. Are you an audio engineer or are you a debt collector? And if you're tired of being a debt collector, then FilePass is for you. Their paywall feature allows you to send mixes to clients that cannot be downloaded until they pay off their remaining balance. As soon as your client pays, their download unlocks automatically. The FilePass paywall works for you 24/7 while you sleep, eat, and make amazing music. Now you can let FilePass be the bad guy so you can keep a happy, healthy relationship with your clients. Secret Sonics listeners, you can get 20% off your first year of FilePass by going to filepass.com/secretsonics. Again, that URL is filepass.com/secretsonics, and you can find that link in the show notes below. All right, back to the episode. So tell me, in your studio, are you tracking full bands live? What are you renting out bigger facilities to do tracking? What is the day-to-day of like tracking bands look like for you?
I mean, I work all over the place in lots of different studios. I guess it just depends on the project, but I have my own studio, Hackney Road Studios, here in London. I'm in the smaller room, the Neve room, with Neve 66 console behind me. But we have another bigger tracking space, which fits a 5-6-piece band in there with 24-channel E-Series SSL. So I do a lot of band recording here. I love getting people to play live if that's right for the project, even if we end up sometimes only keeping certain parts from that and re-tracking things over the top. I find it's very hard if you just have like a drummer playing along to a click track or some guide guitar track to feel inspired, whereas you put like 4 people in the room making music together and you're going to get something amazing out of it, and even if you end up just keeping the drums and redoing everything over the top.
Yes, I totally feel that.
And I'm also excited or into the idea of giving people, like sometimes we have sound beds, like making tape loops or other sound beds that they are kind of going on in the headphones that they can listen to. I remember Fran Healy from Travis telling me that one of the amazing things for him when he worked with Nigel on records was that they went into the live room and they put the headphones on, they started playing, and it sounded like a record. You know, it sounded like a finished record straight away. And that's something that really stuck with me. And also my studio partner here, Sean Woodlock, he's an incredible engineer. I've learnt loads from him over the years as well. And I remember as well just walking into recording sessions and it's like 10 minutes in and the band are playing, and in the control room, it just sounds like a finished record, you know. So that was really inspiring for me.
Yeah, how do you get the band sounding like a finished record so quickly? What's
you know,
that's just systems, or is it, you know?
I mean, part of that's experience, but I guess it's the idea that you're not leaving stuff to the mix. You're not waiting to fix things. You're committing, you know. When people were making records in the 60s, you know, you just made all those decisions right there and then. This is how I'm EQing. Yeah. This is how I'm compressing. And so it's the same thing. I want to do everything and have a very heavy analog front end and make those decisions and paint myself into corners and put effects on microphones and get a sound that feels inspiring. And then people playing will react to that. And then I'll react to what they're doing and do more. And then they'll react. And hopefully we create a very positive cycle of kind of building excitement from there.
Yeah, it seems to be a recurring theme on this podcast of like being fearless in the capture stage. Like Tim was talking about similar things, and also Vance Powell, just like as fast and as inspiring as you can do it, so that like you're just already in the zone, you know? Like,
I think there's, I like to try and make the recording process invisible for musicians so that they're not waiting around, It's not like, oh, let's do vocals. Okay, we're going to do a shootout with 6 different vocal mics now. Maybe if it's the start of a new project, I might separate to the vocal session, like get the singer to record into 2 or 3 microphones, and we'll just kind of see which one feels right. But, I often have singers just record with a handheld microphone, just like a 57 in a control room with the speakers blaring out. But man, those performances are great, and I can deal with the spill and I can make that work,
Yeah.
So just trying to make that process invisible and make the sounds kind of exciting, and that takes time to learn, obviously. But one of the things I think that helps me is like, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel every time. I'm making kind of decisions. I have a way of tracking drums. I have a way of recording bass or guitars. Yes, that will change if the project requires it, but I have certain go-to things I can do so that I can just be fast with those, so I'm not having to make every single decision again every day. Some of those decisions are kind of made based on kind of years of trying things and going, I like this, well, I'm going to stick with this for a while.
Yeah, so you do have a system, and you're just changing things up as needed, basically.
Yeah, I have a rule of always at least doing like something new when I'm tracking. Like I'll have one new microphone or something kind of different or experimental. But if you suddenly rock up in a different studio in the world, you've never been in there, and it's a new drummer and it's a different drum kit, like there's so many variables there. At least if I kind of then just mic that drum kit up in my favorite way, I have a kind of a baseline of, okay, what's coming out of the speakers? Like I can judge this somehow.
Yeah, gives you that reference point. I wanted to ask you if it's okay to ask you about the Smile record. There's a couple songs that have this like really washy sound, almost like Burn the Witch in the last Radiohead record. I believe those songs were You Will Never Work in Television Again and We Don't Know What Tomorrow Brings. It's like, I don't know what it is. It's like nothing is like almost distinct. It's like one big sound, but it has so much power and energy. Do you remember how to do that or like how that happened, or in general advice for getting that kind of massive washy sound?
That is Nigel's like skill with reverb, definitely. And he and I are both fans of spring reverbs, particularly, and we use those a lot. And with pre-delays and like playing around with pre-delay, which I think is something that not that many people think about so much. And then just kind of sending things to reverbs, and creating these washes.
Really, so just reverb, because it feels like a frequency decision was made in I don't know, the guitars or something. But we definitely don't, like, my engineering toolkit is like fairly limited, and I would have just stuck like a U67 on the guitar and off we go. Off we go. Amazing.
That album was all tracked to tape, which was loads of fun. But yeah, nothing special going on apart from just incredible musicians. Yeah, totally. And so these spring reverbs are all analog, I'm assuming. Yeah. Are you a big fan of analog reverbs? Because I feel like it seems to be this thing that a lot of people are saying is just not the same in the box. I'm absolutely a fan of analog reverbs, but also digital ones. I think it's all about context. I always say, because like, let's say you've tracked something all to tape and it's like all very like real sounds and organic or analog synths, and you stick a digital reverb in the mix there, and it's just going to feel weird and out of place. And unless you're trying to create a jarring contrast, it's not going to gel. But then you do something like, I don't know, it's all programmed drums and it's all digital synths and very clean and like modern microphones and stuff. And you stick some noisy analog reverb in there, just in the same way, it's just going to feel really out of place. So I always find it hard when people are like, this is the best or this is the best. It's so context related for me.
Interesting. So analog reverb for analog sound, digital reverb for digital sound, or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that's maybe like a slight oversimplification, but I mean, yes, if you're looking for something to blend, then absolutely that would be the decision. If you're looking for something to contrast, then maybe, you know, opposite things. But, you know, I love like old 1176, like original Uris, and they're amazing, but sometimes they could be a bit noisy, and you have like some really clean, like low noise floor, like production, and you stick that on the vocal and you just hear this kind of crackle in there, and it's like, whoa, that is not good. But then something that's just like been really like heavily tracked through a bunch of analog equipment onto tape, then all of that stuff just kind of adds to create this like background which actually glues it all together.
Interesting. That's really cool. So you mentioned that you have a good story about skirting on the surface, and I'd love it if you're willing to tell it on the air. If not, then not.
No,
That's
absolutely.
whatever you're comfortable with.
So that song is obviously, you know, in a kind of complex time signature. I think it's 11/8, and then it kind of like breaks down and like goes into like Johnny's phasing guitars, and it gets pretty hazy where the one is at that point. We went to record strings for a bunch of the songs. You know, nothing's been done to click, of course. So I'd built click tracks in advance for all those songs. And in the session, we're there, you know, there's like, I don't know, 20 string players and a conductor and everyone in the studio. And, you know, it's like, you know, it's costing a fortune to be there. And we get to that song and the conductor asks for the click in a different way rather than kind of straight ticks. He wanted this kind of like pulsing rhythm. I just said to him, I said, oh yeah, sure, no problem. I'll go and do that. And left them tracking the song that we were working on there with the kind of like house engineer, ran to the next room with my headphones, loaded up the session, and I was like, I just don't know how I'm going to do this. I mean, it was so hard building this click for this track anyway, which just phases out, and now I need to try and change this somehow. And I just had one of those absolute like crisis of confidence moments, you know, and I was just like, wow, you know, I don't know what I'm going to do here. So I took a deep breath, gave myself a moment, and then just said, okay, here we go. You know, let's just do it, and put it all together. Ran straight back into the room. No time to test it. Just kind of loaded it into the session, and then like here I am, like going 30 people looking at me, and off we go. And man, those kind of moments, you don't forget them.
Wow.
But thank fuck it worked, and it came out great. So that was fun.
That's wild. I don't even know what that means. A pulsing metronome.
They just, because it was so fast to kind of like, they didn't want to count it like that. So they basically wanted to break it down.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't remember, but like into a kind of slower, like tempo that has like
tempo. Like a
kind of like
half
that.
speed or
Yeah,
something.
but yeah, it was a nightmare. But
yeah, that sounds really stressful. I probably also would have had like a miniature.
It's just
coronary
funny
or
because
something.
I can kind of like still I remember like that feeling of sitting in that little room somewhere with my headphones on will stay with me. I have a few moments like that from across my career, which are also great because like once you've had 2 or 3 of those, also like nothing phases you. You just learn to deal with these kind of like crushing stress moments.
Yeah. it probably brought you back to like the very beginning of your career. It's like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing now,
absolutely.
and you're this far in, and it's like all of a sudden it's like, oh, what? How am I back here? But
it happens with those
persevere.
guys. Honestly, like they operate at such a high level that like I always feel like I have to show up every time with 110%, to like justify my kind of position in the room, and feel like I'm able to help and contribute to what's going on.
I totally know what you mean. Yeah, I've been there trying to be like, okay, just 110%. You got to prove that you're in the room for a reason, kind of thing. Yeah, amazing. So let's talk about mixing a little bit. I know you're working a lot of analog going in. What's it like once you're in mixing stages?
It's a mixture. I mean, I do work a lot in the box these days, but some projects do require a more analog or a more hybrid approach. So again, not a huge amount of rules, but more and more in the box. I'm a big fan of Chad Blake. He's a person, again, who shares a similar aesthetic. And when he went in the box and I listened to those records, and for me, I was like, how is he getting these sounds? Like, how is he making this happen? But I was like, you know what? It's like, it's just a question of skill. It's not, you can't blame your tools, it's whatever tools you're working on. You just have to have the skills to deliver. And I actually went to meet him and he very graciously allowed me to sit in with him and we've hung out since and keep in touch a bit. And he's always so generous with his kind of like time and opinions and support, which I'm very grateful for as well. But that was really also kind of the turning point in me kind of believing that you can make in the box mixes sound great.
Yeah. Everybody says he's also an amazing guy and an amazing mixer.
He truly is a really, really lovely person.
Yeah, so mixing in the box, what does that usually look like for you specifically? Is it like do you have specific routing that you're usually doing? Is it different every time? What does mixing in the box look like?
I guess, like mentioned earlier, I don't like to reinvent the wheel every time. So I certainly have a template. I'm a big believer in having some kind of starting point and certain things that I would do, but it would also change and evolve for any particular project. I guess I have a master chain that is fairly consistent, and I think the importance of a master chain is something that is very important within the box mixing and maybe not discussed that often. And that, I guess that's the difference when you're running stuff through an analog desk and then maybe an analog compressor and so forth. You just kind of naturally get a lot of the stuff happening, and with digital, maybe you need to kind of layer a few more things on the master chain to kind of get a little bit of that glue back.
Yeah. So when you say master bus, you're talking about like stereo bus processing, not like
no,
mastering
yeah, exactly.
chains.
So I mean, I often have like some kind of like maybe analog desk or tape emulation, and then I always compress my two bus. Maybe use some kind of saturation or enhancement or something like that.
Yeah, I've been using the black box HG2 on my stereo bus actually often, and that thing is like, it's crazy. You put it on, you take it off, and it's just like the whole mix kind of falls apart, or it feels like it falls apart. I really like a lot of the Slate digital plugins, so I'm often using the kind of SSL compressor from there and their console emulation, and the Sonox Inflator is another plugin I'm a very big fan of. Can you explain what's going on under the hood there? Because I'm not totally sure what it does. Like, I know mastering engineers swear by it. Like, what's under the hood there?
It's some kind of low level enhancer, but really I think it's just adding distortion to the sound. I think it might actually be like less complicated than is made out to be, but it's bringing up kind of low level detail. And I guess the secret I've found is that I'm hitting it at maybe quite low levels, so because otherwise it could start to sound a bit like squashed and aggressive and nasty to me. Yeah. So but when you kind of like hit it quite quietly, it's just adding something that I really like.
Yeah, it brings things forward, I think. Yeah, that's amazing. So assuming, because you're doing all this like stereo bus processing, I'm assuming you're not worried about Dolby Atmos, spatial audio, all these things. Has that hit the alternative world, or is it not hit there yet? Because
Yeah.
I'm just, it's a whole can of worms. And I've been talking to people who've been saying like deliverables are changing, and I mean, I think it's more pop artists or pop mixers. You know, they're sending out these stems that have to kind of add up, and I'm assuming that's not an issue for you.
Yeah, I mean, Dolby Atmos is definitely poking its head around the door. I've been to meet the Dolby guys and listen to some Atmos stuff. I think it's potentially interesting. You know, it's obviously still kind of a lot of problems where, like, you know, Apple Music spatial audio like sounds like interprets some of the metadata in a different way, and so like making your Dolby Atmos mixes sound consistent across different platforms is really challenging at the moment. And I think that's kind of stuff really needs to be ironed out, because you need to be able to know that what you've mixed is actually going to sound the same when people listen to it. I think that's like crazy. Yes. I think what's kind of weird is that people are mixing Atmos stuff in these like crazy studios with, like, you know, speakers all over and in the ceiling and stuff, and then no one actually listens to it like that. And like, I feel like you'd want to do the majority of your Atmos mixing in headphones and then just check it on like a multi-speaker system, and we need to have ways of being able to like check those on sound bars, because that's where people have Atmos. You know, they've got like Sonos sound bars in their houses and stuff, and that's creating stuff, and that still seems to be difficult.
So you're just not worried about it yet?
I am. I you know, I don't want to be the person who's like, you know, like you know, Nigel's just recently said on an interview how he hates Atmos and is not interested in stereo is all you need. And I think we have slightly differing opinions there, in that I don't want to shoot down new technology immediately. I want to keep an open mind and see what can be done. I've heard a lot of really terrible Atmos mixes. I've heard some good ones. And I think for some music, having that extra spatialization could potentially be very interesting. And I did take a song of mine over to Dolby and took it from stems, but really for me, because I tend to work with like groupings, you know, because I get something to mix with 200 tracks, and it's like my brain can't deal with that, you know. I need to break those down into groups of things, of drums, bass, guitars, and so I'm making stems anyway at the end of a project, you know. So it would be very easy to just basically take those 10 stem tracks basically and make an Atmos mix from there. You know, it's kind of weird because with Atmos there isn't kind of a mastering stage at the moment. You just kind of print that Atmos mix out, and then like how does 2-bus compression work over that? Have you got separate 2-bus compression for the like front and rear, or are you trying to find a plugin that can kind of do all that? So I mean, you know, I need to do a lot more exploring, but I'm really open and excited to try and play around with it more and see what that format can offer.
Yeah. But right now it's not much of your work is going in that direction, I'm assuming.
No, absolutely not. There's been a couple of projects that I've mixed where we've kind of, you know, there's been a question of, oh, maybe we need an Atmos mix, but it hasn't materialized or been needed in the end yet.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm set up and have capabilities to do that when it becomes relevant.
Oh yeah, you've got Atmos in your room now set up.
Yeah, I have. I definitely don't have like any height speakers or things like that. But again, I feel like you can do like the majority of that with headphone work. You can kind of test your rears with like a kind of 5.1 setup, and again, you know, I think almost more importantly, you know, have like sound bars and things to like test and listen, like what the consumer's actually going to be hearing when they listen to those tracks.
Yeah. That's the biggest question, I think, is the consumer side of things with this Atmos stuff. It's like consumers don't seem to care at all.
I mean, I've had a couple of people, like, you know, my dad, for instance, just like, you know, we'd not spoken about it, and he got in touch with me and was saying how excited he is about like all this spatial audio stuff, and he's over 70 now, and he's like got his Apple Music subscription, and got his AirPods, and like really just going through stuff and listening and making notes of what he thinks are good sounding Atmos mixes. Even though he's not technical at all, but he's just like, oh, I love how this sounds or what it's added to the song,
Right, but he's clearly a person that loves music, and like you mentioned, he was a reporter, and so he's already probably in the 1%.
Absolutely, yeah, I know. I mean, most people are just listening to stuff out their phone speaker now, aren't they? But headphone listening is growing. Like everyone's walking around with like AirPods and listening to music on the go. So, and actually, like I just got myself some of those like AirPod Pro 2s, the new ones, and I haven't really got on very well with noise cancelling headphones when I checked them out last, which was quite a few years ago. I think the technology was maybe early at the time, but that kind of phase cancellation was just giving me like a headache, and when it's doing its thing, it's like my brain felt like it was like being sucked out.
I had similar feelings.
And I literally, like last week, I put the first AirPod Pro in. I was like in Canary Wharf. It was like noisy. There's all these people walking around, this hubbub. And I put the other one in, and it's like someone had just hit mute on the TV. It was so freaky. Like I literally stopped in my tracks. I was running late, and I was like, what is going on? I can't hear anyone's footsteps. I can't hear any background sound. It was absolutely mad. So, technology marches on, and you got to be open to it. And I'm sure that stuff will continue to develop and could potentially be interesting. So keeping an open mind.
Yeah. All right, cool. That sounds like a good place to land on for this conversation. Amazing. And in terms of like monitoring, I see you got those nice ATCs behind you, and also some Amphions. Those are big ATCs. Are you mixing into those?
Yeah. ATC 100s. They sound great. I love them. I mean, I'm not working on them all the time, but I'm just a big fan of ATCs in general. That's definitely my go-to speaker. Anything they do, really, So it's just a sound I'm familiar with. And for me, with monitoring, I walk into a studio or room and I play something and have a listen, and it just either sounds right or wrong. And if I get there sounds wrong, then I'll just try and think about what steps I can take to make it sound right for me, because I don't want to be having to make like compensations in my head going, oh, the low end sounds different, so I need to do this so that when I'm doing something, so it will sound how I want. I just want it to sound right. And ATCs have done that for me always.
Do you bring a pair around when you go to different studios?
Definitely not the big ones, but sometimes I take speakers with me to studios, but I've also had the opportunity of working in so many places now. I say one of my skills is getting comfortable in a new environment very quickly.
Yeah, that's great. Do you have like a reference playlist of songs you listen to kind of get familiarized with those different studios?
I mean, I'm going to sound egotistical here, but I mean, I often play like my own productions or mixes because I know them inside out,
Yeah. Makes sense. To bring it up, have a listen, and determine
exactly,
if you're comfy or not.
I mean, that's the same thing, when I'm going out live, I often do, as in, you do that same thing, have like a reference track you play and listen to the PA and go like, does this make sense to me? What I'm hearing there. Mm-hmm. So like that's interesting to me from like studio and live, because people are often like, oh, I have no clue, or there's such different worlds, but I feel you're always trying to conceptually achieve the same thing, really. You're trying to make the listener have an emotional experience and a reaction to something they're listening to, and maybe the tools or the processes that you achieve that differ across the different worlds, but the end goals are the same.
Yeah, front of house sounds really cool. Have you had any lessons from front of house that you could apply to like mixing in the studio?
In the live environment, you just have a whole other level of dynamics and volume control. In the studio, you're always trying to like kind of fake that, aren't you? Things becoming much louder, or the verse getting like squash it.
Right, you squash it and you automate it.
Maybe you drop your master fader in the verse, or maybe you filter your drums down a little bit so they're a bit darker in the verse, and it opens up brighter in the chorus or something. And in like live I can like bring my master fader down 10 dB, you know. It's like wow, and then just like push it back up like crazy. You know, I have
awesome.
There's a song on the Smile record called The Same, and I basically start that so quiet that the audience can barely hear it. You know, it's like probably hovering somewhere down at like 82 dB, which sounds loud in the studio, but like, you know, live it just causes the whole room to shush. And then throughout the song, as it's growing, I'm like building up, filtering stuff, and just slowly just nudging the master over, like up and up and up over a course of like 4 or 5 minutes, and just like end it like at a brief, like, you know, 110 or something crazy like that. And it just, there's this moment halfway through the song where you just always, the audience just starts to like put their hands up, and they're just like swept away with this like passion and excitement. And so I've been trying to think of how I can kind of incorporate that in my studio mixing as well, and try and kind of bring people along like that in the same way.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, it's so hard in the studio because we're limited.
Yeah.
We limit, and like people are driving around or on the subway, or you know, the tube in England, and so it's you gotta have like that. You have to have that sort of normal,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
normalization thing. But it's really it is a bummer because you can't get the full dynamic range, and that is so powerful. Yeah, that's 10 dBs. That's a lot of gain in a live. You know, that's crazy. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's really neat. Back to mixing for a second. I wanted to ask you about these kind of like indie vocals that you seem to do so well. You know, indie isn't necessarily known for hi-fi, but these vocals just like jump through the speaker in like this great way, but they still sound like aggressive and you know, dirty, but still so powerful and huge. Like what's your approach to treating vocals, generally speaking, and the kind of genres that you're working in?
I'm just a sucker for a good 1176, you know? I mean, it's just my favorite compressor. It works on almost everything. And it, to me, I always feel like the sound of that compressor, it's not just about compression. It's like if you had a drawing and you took a pen and you drew the outline and made it really sharp and in focus. And I feel like that's what that compressor does to sound.
Yeah, it highlights the best parts of it, or the most important parts of it.
Yeah, it just brings things really into focus and up front, and makes things pop out of the speakers.
And this is generally in the box or analog when you're mixing vocals, or is it in the tracking stage?
I mean, definitely in the tracking stage. I don't think I've tracked vocals without compression like for the last 10 years.
Okay.
And the 1176 would be a go-to compressor for me. Not always, you know, it depends. You have to be flexible and listen to the voices and what's required. But I mean, I'll use that on anything, bass, guitars, you know, you name it. That compressor is amazing. It works for me. And then just saturation in general, again, both in the tracking stage and mixing stage, you know, just kind of, it's very easy to overcook things, and sometimes I hear records and they just sound small to me, and I think that's through too much compression and saturation. So you can definitely have too much of a good thing, but there's that sweet spot. I mean, even on a preamp, there's like a sweet spot, and it takes a while to kind of start hearing that, where it just sounds really open and big and exciting, but without like closing down and being like oversaturated or just too quiet and not enough gain in there, not enough voltage going through that piece of equipment.
Yeah, so you need to experiment with your equipment and find the right spot for those pieces of gear.
Yeah,
and then just trial and error and reps, and then and that's it.
I guess so. Yeah.
Amazing.
I mean, there are some great saturation plugins out there now. I mean, all that Soundtoy stuff I think is amazing. You know, Devil Lock, Decapitator. Yeah, amazing.
They're so good. Yeah, between that and the black box, you should be set. You know,
exactly.
I've heard great things about Saturn.
Yes, I have used it a bit, and it's just like I just like simple tools. I like stuff with like 2 or 3 buttons, and like when you just get to have a million, like I'd rather have a piece of equipment that only does one thing but sounds amazing doing that, rather than something that does like 20 great things, but also 40 bad things if you said it wrong. You know, I'd rather be like, this is an 1176 compression and it like I need this, or like, no, that's the wrong compressor. Rather than changing the settings, actually it needs an LA2A. It needs something kind of softer and smoother, you know? And so, yeah, I like tools that do one thing or two things really, really well.
Yeah. Keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, I mean, exactly, yeah. I mean, you know, going back just to that Devil Lock plugin as an example, you know, I often have it set, but then have the mix control at like 4% or something like that. So, you know, it's just adding just like a little bit of something there. But
yeah,
compression and saturation are like sonic varnish for me. You know, if you're varnishing something and you do one coat, it doesn't look great, but you do 3 or 5 coats and you have an amazing finish. And I use that approach of sonic varnish with compression and saturation. Yeah.
Right. And then you're probably like, you know, EQing, compressing, doing de-essing, compressing again or whatever, and then you're always going through the stereo bus at the end also, which is giving some extra that kind of glue. And then by the end of it, you have like a big, really thick varnish. I know, so that's a great analogy. I've never thought about it quite like that. But they say that compression multiplies; it doesn't add, right? Like if you have like a 3-to-1 or a 4 and then a 4-to-1, that would be like a 12-to-1 compression. Like I don't know.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I don't know how true that is.
It's because I don't really think about like, you know, when I was taught compression, it was like, oh, high ratio and like low ratio and threshold signal going over, and I just wasn't really able to, like, compression's so hard to learn anyway, and you've got all these controls and people are explaining it in such a technical way. I find it much more instinctual, and I think that's why I gravitate to like 1176s or LA2As, because it's like you turn it up and you get more compression, and you turn it down and you get less compression. And, you know, like I always just use a 4-to-1 ratio and the same attack and release settings. I never change it, you know. It's like I found my settings and it's like, this works for me.
Yeah, great. And well, clearly it is working for you. So keep at it. Yeah, that's awesome, dude. Before we jump into the Saw segment, I want to ask you about mastering, because well, we talked about the stereo bus processing, and also you mentioned how Nigel doesn't like Atmos, and I think he mentioned also that there's something in the mastering stage that gets lost with the Atmos thing, and so I'm assuming you're on a similar page to that. What's your who do you master with? What are you looking for in a mastering engineer, and kind of what are you looking for them to do that you haven't done yet?
I work with Matt Colton a lot in the UK. I think he's amazing. Had a lot of stuff mastered with Bob Ludwig as well, who obviously is phenomenal. Lots of different people. Sometimes an artist has a relationship, you know, going with a mastering engineer over many years. So, and I'm always open and interested in working with new people. But generally, I mean, I always send my reference mix to the mastering engineer, and I'll always keep on everything that I've had on my 2-bus, except for the final limiter that I've had as a kind of reference master for the band. I'll take that off, but I'm asking my mastering engineer not to do very much. It's like, I'm happy with my mix and my balances. I don't need you to add like more low end or change my mix. I just want it to come back a little bit louder and potentially a little bit more expensive sounding if they have some way of adding a little bit of like fairy dust to it. And if it's like an album and there's maybe one track is bass light, like either have a conversation with me about it and I'll look at it, or maybe, you know, make a small change there.
Yeah, you're looking for that, like your master bus to be basically 99% the master.
Yes, yeah.
And just get that QA and that final little bit.
Just final. I find like they still have ways, mastering is with the experience of like doing limiting in a slightly more transparent way, or
yeah,
just kind of like it's another set of ears, maybe doing some, like, I think, you know, I've never really discussed it with Matt, but I can hear he's doing some mid-side processing for sure there, and how that changes. And usually if I have any feedback for like Matt, it will be like, I love what I'm doing. I love what you're doing. Can you just roll it back by half, you know? and
Yeah. Meet me halfway.
yeah,
Yeah, I've had that conversation before also.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting. I spoke with this mastering engineer, Elisa Pangsang, out of British Columbia, and she was saying, like, mixing engineers, I almost never add high end because mixing engineers know what the sibilants should be because that's how they mixed it. Like
right,
that's
okay, yeah,
you have to be like so careful with
Yeah.
this stuff. Like when there's so much intention in the mix. She
Yeah.
also works on the ATC 100s,
right, okay,
and
yeah.
like yeah, the mastering engineer has so much power to very quickly destroy something that you worked so hard to create.
Yeah.
And I think that especially with like presence and like
Yeah.
S's and stuff, that stuff could really get out of hand sometimes if you're not careful.
I would say it's really good for aspiring producers and mixers when they get to projects which start having budgets for mastering to try and establish relationships with mastering engineers. I'm
Yeah.
very grateful for Mandy Parnell early on in my career giving me loads of time. I'd go to mastering sessions and be able to listen to my mixes in her room and just like I could hear the problems at that point, and sometimes she'd fix them or then she'd give me the opportunity to go away and fix those. It was amazing to have that kind of support and space to be able to kind of go, oh, okay, these are the kind of things I need to be like concerned about and think about and go away and look at.
Yeah, it's like hearing what the final product ends up being helps you deliver something that's closer to that.
Yeah.
When you're in that kind of that zone in between.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome, amazing. So let's jump over to the sauce segment. We'll kind of listen to what you're working on, and we'll keep chatting from there. So you sent me a track called Octopus by Island. Let's have a listen to that for about 90 seconds, and we'll chat about it. Sound cool?
Yeah, let's do it.
Mikko, sounds so good. I love the drums. Like kind of like what I was talking about earlier. They have that very earthy, dry, compressed sound, and I love the bass, the vocals. It's all good. Well, what's the opening there? It's like it's just harmonics on electric guitar.
Yeah, nothing special going on my end. I just stuck a mic in front of the amp and off we went. I mean, there was a lot of production discussion in pre-production and also during the tracking on how that song would kind of start and get going. So more from a kind of aesthetic point, we worked on that beginning quite a long way with just that guitar and then the kind of things banging in from there. I guess the big production decision was that it's two drum kit performances on that song. So I got the drummer to play the song once, got a take we liked, pan that all the way to one side, and then we did it again. Fairly similar, but not exactly the same. So you hear these fills where they like it's kind of the same but different in both ear.
Oh, that is wild. Yeah. That's what's going on with those like tom fills. Yeah, basically.
Yeah, and then so there it leaves a lot of space in the middle because like all the drums are kind of like really far. I mean, it's hard left, hard right panning, and then in the middle you've got that like guitar and voice and bass sitting there.
And the kick drums are also panned?
No, the kick drums. So I basically kick drum flamming is that's horrible. So
that's dangerous, right?
Yeah. So I used the kick from like one performance, and then that was like separate from the rest of the kick kit in the middle.
Was it the exact same drum kit?
Yeah.
Performed twice, or it was a separate kind of kit?
No, same kit and same miking as well. I mean, I have done stuff where you change things around a bit more, but I wanted the left and the right to have a consistency sonically, but a variation in the playing.
Yeah, it's like double tracking an acoustic guitar or something.
Exactly.
That's wild. What made you think to do that for this song specifically?
I have no idea.
Just like,
I mean,
let's get a vibe.
Yeah. It's funny because I believe in working like really fast. A lot of the time when you're actually in the studio, I try and work faster than people can think. And then we stop and reflect and look at what we've done and then go back and be like, well, that's no good. Let's do that again, or let's retrack that song. But what kind of sometimes happens then is I kind of look back at those things and I'm like, did I do that? It's like, I can't remember very much about it. It's like, and sometimes I'm like, how did I do that? Because again, I'm just trying to work on instinct at a speed and then see what happens when everyone's kind of like just doing things and reacting to things. But I think I was just looking for a way of it's a great simple song, but looking at ways of creating something in the listener. And then what happens is there's the kind of middle eight, and then these kind of like hip hop drums come back in for the end, and then that's like one single kit in the middle, and it's like a little bit too loud in the mix, and like that's one of those things where it creates those like moments. Like I did, like anyone who listens to that song, maybe you're not even into the song or whatever, you don't like that kind of music, but you hear this kind of like floaty performance with the drum kits, and it goes to the outro, and it's like, and you're like, yeah, that's a moment, you know. And like I'm really pleased with that, how that came out.
That's sick, dude. Any other things that happened in that mix? I love the bass tone. The bass was really big.
Yes, yeah. Like... big round bass. Yeah, I'm often not like a huge fan of lots of top end on basses, or just kind of rolling.
I'm a flat wound man.
Yes,
so.
Absolutely. Yeah. But again, you know, I'll always mic a bass amp, always take a DI. What gets used varies from project to project, again relating to the sonic identity, but the bass was really an important part of this record. And Jay also plays a lot of like chords and things on some songs, so it's just kind of making sure that like I guess I was interested in the sonic identity of this record, even though it is an indie band, to have some like hip hop influence in terms of like big low end. And so that was a kind of aesthetic choice.
Was the bass? I wasn't paying enough attention, but was the bass lower than the kick drum there? Like you're using like the sub of the bass and like or are you a sidechain person? I don't know.
I don't think I really had a conscious thought process for this song about that.
You just mixed it.
Yeah, I do sometimes think about whether the bass is higher or lower, or sometimes sidechain, but equally sometimes it's not just something I think about. I'm just like, does this feel good? Does it feel exciting?
Yeah, I think this harks back to that lesson that you got from Nigel of like, does it sound good? Does it feel good? Like it doesn't like it does like that. Going for that perfect aesthetic is not as important as the vibe, and I think that really comes through in this, and also a lot like, you know, all the stuff you're working on of just like that emotion, and finding the elements that sound emotionally that grab you, because I think that grabs me. So I'm like trying to reverse engineer all the engineering like experience and go back to like, what do I love? Like what are those sounds that inspire me?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something. It's like beyond the headiness of it, you know. The brainy part of your.
If I was going to mention like one low end technique that I use fairly frequently these days, just to kind of try and give something specific, I love Fab Filter EQ, the Q3 plugin, and what I often do will put that on my kick drum and my bass, where they are looking at the frequency response of each other, and then if it does look like there's a significant amount of energy, or sometimes you could just like, rather than a shelf or something, just do a little cut on the bass where that kick like fundamental is sitting through, and that can kind of help that if you're looking for that definition to kind of come through like that.
Yeah, I do that a lot. Also, I've sidechained the Pro Q3 in dynamic mode to like exactly where the kick is going. So I do that sometimes.
Yeah.
Also get a little extra.
I do that.
Not all the time.
I use
but sometimes.
The FabFilter multiband plugin. What's it called? The FabFilter MB or something?
I think it's the Pro MB. I think
Pro MB. Yeah. For some reason, I just like the multiband. I like that plugin more than doing multiband stuff on the Q3, and I can't really answer why, but I just gravitate towards that when I'm doing that kind of stuff.
Maybe it works more like faster with less. I don't know.
I don't know.
Whatever works for you.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, so anything else happened in that track that we should hear about?
I mean, there's quite a lot of reverb textures there, I guess. And I used a spring reverb. I have one called the Master Room here at my studio, so I used that a lot across things. But then there would have also been there's some kind of longer digital reverbs. A big fan of the Valhalla plugins, like a lot of people are. I do think those sound amazing. You know, and they're like $50 each or something, like crazy
so
like
good.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, the vintage verb.
Vintage verb, you know, I love the shimmer as well, like those like long, you know, you take the pitch mode off and it just does these beautiful blooms of reverbs as well.
Yeah. I love how we all use the same equipment and we're able to get such totally wildly different sounds out of them.
Absolutely.
Like everybody, like who doesn't use the Pro Q3, but like literally,
yeah.
And everyone's doing things that sound so different.
Yeah.
And just like, again, back to your aesthetic, right? You're just going down that road of like what sounds good to me, what sounds right to me.
Yeah, and everyone's got different approaches. Like some people will go through and like high pass filter every single track they have, and then have like super clean space for like the kick and the bass. And some people won't do any high pass filtering, and like neither of those approaches is wrong or right. It's just what works for you. But every small decision like that builds up to create your aesthetic at the end.
Yeah. Go with what works for you. I think it's been the big lesson of this podcast for me is like, you got to double down on your thing. Otherwise,
and I guess like
just trying to do someone else's thing.
Yeah. One thing that's interesting to me, talking with a lot of kind of up and coming producers and engineers, is they're like, will be like, oh, I watched this YouTube video and like they said you should do this kind of thing here, and I'm like, okay, cool. Like, what kind of music does the person who made that video you watched make? And they're like, oh, I think it's like, I don't know, maybe it's like Norwegian black metal. And I'm like, well, are you really into like Norwegian black metal? Is that what you're making? And they're like, no, I'm making a hip hop. I'm like, well, maybe the advice that person was giving isn't very relevant to you. So again, you need to like think about your sources, and like if you're not into the kind of music I make or the references I have, then stop listening to me right now, you know. It's like,
well, there's always the general advice, which is always good.
Sure, yeah, but I feel like there's so many different ways to achieve stuff, and so you need to be learning from the people who are making stuff that inspires you and who you're into as well. Or going, you know, there's also value in going to look at people who are doing something completely different, which you don't maybe understand, but you respect. Like, that's great. But like, you know, taking advice from a mixer whose mixes you hate is no good.
Find the artists and the people that make those records that you love and hunt them down, like I hunted you down. That's what you got to do. Amazing. Well, dude, Mikko, this has been so much fun. I learned so much chatting with you, but we're not done yet. I have a couple more questions that I want to ask you that I try to ask everybody on the show.
Okay.
Talking about like inspiration, you know, we'll have days where we're super pumped to get in the studio, and then there's days where we're a little bit less feeling it. Do you do anything to kind of stay jazzed to get into the studio? It could be routines, habits, just anything that you do that kind of helps you shift your mood.
I mean, my life has no routine because, like, one month I'll be abroad somewhere recording, and then, the next month I'll be like at my studio here loads, or at home mixing. I have a mix room there as well. So I do try and just create routine where I can. Not necessarily to like, I'm not sure if that like inspires my work, but just like, getting up and having the same kind of morning routine, I think that for me, those kind of things could be very helpful in terms of getting into routine. And I'm always craving routine because I often don't have it.
Yeah, that sounds really hectic. Going on tour for a month, then working in your studio, then going home. Like, man, I could barely keep routine, working out of my own home, with now 2 kids in the house and occasionally gigging. That's hard enough for me, like, I don't know how you do it.
But I've recently, like a year and a half ago, I've moved out of London. I live in East Sussex now, and I'm really enjoying the kind of countryside. So, I take breaks, go for walks, go and like walk my dogs in the forest, and that kind of the nature's really inspiring me at the moment.
Amazing. How do you stay healthy on tour? Do you have any any tips for people going on tour?
Yeah, I mean, don't drink every day. It's like, I guess that's a really easy one, but like it's the environment where like having like 3 beers and a couple of shots every night is considered completely normal in some cases, whereas like you did that anywhere else and you'd be labeled an alcoholic. So I definitely have like non-drinking days, and I like working out, so I'm always like looking for gyms, and just walking, trying to move and stay active.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I feel like, I've only been on tour a little bit, but my little experience was, wow, I understand why people drink, because it's like, it's stressful. There's an audience. Let me just have a swig of this before I get on stage. And you could see how that's a totally slippery slope.
But it's the same going away to record though. We were in at Sonic Ranch with Arcade Fire in Texas for like 5 weeks in the middle of nowhere, and be very easy to just like eat unhealthily and drink loads in the studio, and I went for a walk every day in the desert, and just made sure I got down the gym at least 3 times a week, and kept myself active as well. So I'm just like sitting in my chair for like 12 hours a day.
Yeah, get to the gym, people. This is a hard advice for myself as well. Amazing. Awesome. So I guess that just leaves us with the final question of the show, and I've kind of rebranded it recently for advice for people coming up. But just looking back on your journey, was there something that you did or didn't do that maybe you regret that you'd want to impart on somebody at the beginning of their journey and be like, hey, keep at that. It's going to get you where you want to go, or don't do that. That's going to really hold you back.
That's a great question. One of the things I've reflected on is that when you're starting out, like some things stay the same, but like where the music industry was when I started out 20 years ago is different where it is now. And so sometimes I often feel like that question could be more relevant to someone who's 5 years ahead of you rather than 10 years ahead of you, because they've just been through it and they kind of like remember those struggles. But, I was broke for a very, very long time. And like, honestly, I think part of my kind of success has just been like outlasting other people. There comes a time where people kind of get fed up of like, they want to get a nicer apartment, or they want to have kids and they want to do things, and then the other career options start to become more appealing, and I just could never imagine doing anything else. And I just woke up with a passion and to make records and work in music and put yourself out there, find opportunities. I think everyone's path is different, but I can't remember where I heard this or who said this to me, but people always overestimate what they can achieve in a year and underestimate what they can achieve in 5. And so you need to set yourself kind of long-term goals and work towards those.
Yeah. I think I heard first Gary V say that.
Okay,
or maybe
right.
it was like, it's come up on the podcast a couple of times. I totally resonate with that. I think at a certain point, maybe 5 years ago, I kind of like decided I needed to enjoy the journey more.
Yeah.
And stop like focusing on goals and more just be like, I'm doing this and that's enough. And like, if I keep doing it, more things will happen. Kind of like what you were saying. And it's like, yeah, there's no other way to do it. Otherwise, you're going to just be so disappointed when you don't hit those 1 year goals that you set out for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I was working with loads of bands in the kind of Southeast London scene and different artists, and I guess I have noticed looking back of stages, and one was breaking out from that scene into like a bigger London scene, and there was a transition where I was starting to lose some of the older gigs I'd had while I hadn't quite got the new ones, and it's like change can be painful, but you've got to embrace it. And then again, now, like moving to a more global scene has been another kind of transition like that. But it's you got to keep looking ahead and thinking about you can't stay still.
Yeah, you can't stay still. That's interesting. The transition from like a local scene to the global scene. What's that been like for you?
I mean, I guess having like bigger budgets to make records is definitely nice in the way that you're not always stressing about time. It's like, oh, we've got to do that, because I feel like it's really important in every project, even if you're mapping things out and creating a plan, to leave some time for experimentation and happy accidents. And that's definitely a luxury that time gives you. But then I also worked on projects where there's too much time and unlimited budgets, and that is not always beneficial to making something instinctual and good, and then resisting the urge to mess with that.
That's really interesting. Yeah, time is a crazy factor because you build a bit more margin in your life and you could be less stressed out, but sometimes the urgency goes away. Yeah. I was thinking also about how you talk about how fast you work, and you work faster than the artist can even necessarily think, which is great. And then you just like stop and you analyze, and I think that's really interesting because then you kind of go by the seat of your pants, and then afterwards you can reflect on it rather than like being safe in the session, and the safety of time is definitely sounds like a debilitating thing, but also it's so stressful when you don't have enough time.
When you don't, yeah. And like I do remember like early on being in the studio, and there just like wasn't budget for more studio time, and it's like, well, we have to get the take of this song, and like, okay, I feel like this song could be better if we could track it again, but that's just not realistic. So But then limitations are also a source of creativity, so you find other ways of then taking that forward. But these days it's not uncommon for some songs to just come back and retrack them 2 or 3 times until capture what I'm trying to look for there.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, I guess we'll see how it goes when as more projects come in, and keep me posted how that goes.
Absolutely.
Well,
it's been really fun talking to you.
Yeah, Mikko, it's been great chatting with you. Thank you for taking the time to do this and teaching me so much about what goes on behind the scenes and your workflow and all that stuff. It's been great.
Thanks very much. It's been great.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Secret Sonics. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If you've been digging the show, it would be awesome if you could share this episode or your favorite episode with a friend or two, and or leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher of choice. That's it for now. Have a great week. Take care and dig in. See you soon. Bye-bye.